Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of This weekend, I'm reviewing Revival by Stephen King, and this was recommended to me by the viewer Cody Williams. So Cody, if you're watching, I hope you enjoy. But I understand it's been about a year since I've read and reviewed a Stephen King book, and that's not because I don't like Stephen King. As a matter of fact, I absolutely love his work, and I grew up reading his books and watching his movies. It's just that when I created this channel, I wanted to try to focus on other authors who might not share his same spotlight. But there will be times in the future where I do read and review more of his work. Now, as far as Revival is concerned, this is perhaps the most depressing book I've ever read in my entire existence. And compared to other Stephen King books, this is probably his most nihilistic and depressing work since Pet Sematary, although when I read Pet Sematary back in the day, it still didn't hit me on the same depressing level that this book did. And going into this book, I really didn't expect to feel the degree of gloom and doom that I did, but of course here we are. Yet, just because this book is as dark as what it is, it doesn't mean it's a bad book. It was actually a really great read. It's just that when you decide to read this, you need to have some comedies on hand. But without me rambling on anymore, let's just go in and get in our Sunday's best and go down to the Revival. Revival by Stephen King takes place in current time, and it introduces the elderly protagonist by the name of Jamie, which shortly thereafter we discover that this is a coming-of-age novel where Jamie is reflecting on his life, and as he reflects, we discover that the importance of the story takes place during Jamie's childhood in the 1960s, which this is when Reverend Jacobs came to town to be their new reverend, and with him came his wife by the name of Patsy and their young son Maury. From here, the Jacobs family becomes a strong, upstanding pillar of the community because they truly love their neighbors as they do themselves. Also, we learn that Reverend Jacobs has a fascination with electricity, and he uses electricity in his youth group meetings to create religious metaphors and to keep the young kids interested. Well, after the passing of years, a horrible accident occurs, and this leaves Reverend Jacobs as a fatherless widower, which in turn causes him to lose his religion. Then, after he denounces God and practically says religion is a false insurance, he leaves town. But that's not the last we see of Reverend Jacobs, because as the story progresses and Jamie grows from child to adult, their paths cross multiple times. One of which is where Reverend Jacobs has now undergone an alias and is working in a carnival sideshow where he takes 3D photos of volunteers by using electricity. Then years later, we encounter Reverend Jacobs again as he's undergone another alias and is now a faith healer and is healing people by using electricity. And even though his revivals appear like they're Christian-based and they're helpful, little does anyone know he's actually been using ancient texts found in forbidden books. And for some people who have encountered him and his electricity, they have now suffered dire side effects. Yet those horrors aren't the worst of it, as Reverend Jacobs plans to conduct a new experiment by using electricity, and the results will be soul-shattering. At the beginning of Revival, King cites his influences as Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, H.P. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, Donald Wandery, Fritz Leiber, August Derleth, Shirley Jackson, Robert Bloch, Peter Straub, and Arthur Machen, whose story The Great God Pan has haunted King since his childhood. Also, it was the Great God Pan that played a major influence in regards to Revival's ending experiment. Previously, King noted that since his childhood, he has wanted to write a horror story about a body resurrected by electricity, as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein concept always fascinated him. But that desire sat on the back burner until he started writing Joyland, which is referenced in Revival. And as he wrote Joyland, He considered the similarities between carnies and the faith healers in the revival circuit, which it was this comparison that added to the background of Reverend Jacobs. Fun facts. Here's a few things you might not know about Stephen King and revival. On the Today Show, King noted that he was raised as a Methodist, and he hopes that people can differentiate the difference between his work and himself. When questioned about his faith, he noted he would rather believe than not believe, and this is a philosophy he adapted during his addiction problems. Aside from King's religious beliefs, The Guardian noted that King had called revival a nasty, dark piece of work. Also, King added that revival was too scary and he didn't want to think about it anymore. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoilers section, which, if you haven't read this book before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you wish to skip this section, just scroll down to the comments and you'll see that I have a comment pinned at the top where if you were to click the timestamp within that, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so ready, set, go! Since everyone has had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about two scenes that I will never be able to unread, and I would like to talk about another scene where I discovered that this was in fact a horror book. Now, the first moment that really emotionally affected me was the death of Reverend Jacobs' wife and child. And this comes about because we have a character in the book who's seizure prone, and while he's driving, he has a seizure, which in turn causes Patsy and Maury to suffer a fatal wreckage. And as a townsperson is approaching the accident to see if she can help, this is when Patsy emerges and we discover that one of her arms has been ripped off, she has an eyeball hanging from her eye socket, and there's this horrible gash in her scalp. Also, surprise, surprise, she's carrying a bloody bundle which happens to be the faceless remains of Maury. Then, to make everything worse, Reverend Jacobs goes to where their bodies are being held and he demands to see them. And upon doing so, he releases this god-awful scream. So this moment really got to me because it comes out of nowhere, and it also made me realize how quickly a happy family can be torn apart and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Also, King takes the opportunity to really rub salt in our wounds here because he really depicts a realistic image of a mother who's dying and her son who's already dead. Then we have grief on top of that. So, because of how realistic everything was, I had to put the book down to be able to digest everything I had read, and because of how dark this moment was, I wasn't able to return to the book until a few days later. The next moment I would like to talk about isn't disturbing, but it was the first time that I realized this was a horror book. Which this is when Jamie has grown into a traveling musician who has become addicted to heroin and morphine. And one evening, as he's wandering about, he hears in the distance this electrical crack and a familiar voice who's asking for volunteers to participate in 3D photos with lightning, which of course the voice belongs to Reverend Jacobs, who has now undergone the alias of Dan the Electric Man and is now working in the Carnival Sideshow. Which, after that evening's show ends, Jacobs and Jamie decide to play catch-up where Jamie admits that he's now a drug addict, and Jacobs claims that he can cure Jamie of his addiction by using electricity. However, after Jamie is cured, Jamie wakes up and he's stuttering and repeating the words, "something happened." Then, after that comes and goes, Jamie starts to have these blackouts where when he wakes up, he discovers that he's self-mutilated. So, until this point, I honestly thought Revival was a drama. Then, when I discovered that this is what we were working with, I'm like, okay, well, we're entering horror territory now. And the first thought that came to my mind was, if Jamie had this side effect, What other damages had Jacob's caused to other people? And I thought that maybe we were about to go in this downward spiral about maybe the cure being worse than the disease. However, the whole electrical cure concept is shortly lived, and that actually is just a side item to the main entree at the end of this novel. Despite this book feeling like a drama with its horror elements being few and in between, the final moment I would like to talk about is the grand finale, which scared the ever-loving living hell out of me. Now, what happens here is Jamie is called upon to assist Jacobs with a final experiment where they are to revive a dead girl by the name of Mary Faye. And it's pretty clear that Jacobs plans to use her as a conduit so he can see into the afterlife and learn about what happened to Patsy and Maury. Well, as the experiment is taking place, they are able to actually see into the afterlife, but this is when they discover that there is no heaven or hell. Instead, the afterlife is nothing more than this ruined landscape where there's a parade of naked human souls that are stretching into the horizon. And to keep these souls moving forward, there's these monstrous ant-like beings that have human faces, and these ant creatures are biting at the human souls to keep them working. Then overhead we have all of these crazed sort of deities that the ant creatures serve, and in serving them they use the human souls as their workers. Plus, this is where Jamie discovers that all of the souls here are a mixture of good and bad, and when you die, you're doomed to be a slave for all of eternity for these elder gods. So this really freaked me the hell out, and even though I believe in heaven and hell as well as reincarnation or being earthbound, I could not stop thinking about this. And the more I thought about it, the more it scared the hell out of me, because it made me realize how valuable life is and how frightening the afterlife could be. Personally, I felt sorry for everyone in this book, although it really did piss me off when Jacobs gave Jamie the ultimatum that he was either going to help him or he was going to let Astrid die. But even still, I didn't hate Jacobs because I understand that he did this out of desperation. Still, had I been Jamie, I would have punched Jacobs in the balls and made him scream out a high note like Ted Neely in Jesus Christ Superstar. Then after he caught his breath from having his balls knocked up into his lungs, I would have made him fix Astrid regardless of his ultimatum. Then after he was done, I would have just patted him on the back and be like, "Bruh, you know why. We cool, right?" Until I got to the middle of Revival, I honestly thought that this was a fantastic drama like Hearts in Atlantis or The Green Mile. But instead, this was actually a slow-burning horror novel that had a major payoff at the end. And truth be it, due to its twist ending, I was reminded of how I felt when I read 11/22/63, and I was left thinking, WTF. Now, as far as themes are concerned, Revival touches on a lot of hard-hitting subjects, like losing your religion, as well as questioning the afterlife and questioning God, and it also focuses on how grief can change a person, which I think these subjects are very human and something that a lot of people can relate to. And to show how these subjects can change anyone, I found it very interesting how Reverend Jacobs was the source who lost everything and was unable to recover. And I think a lot of other readers would have found this interesting as well, because most people don't consider a reverend to be a person who loses his faith over something traumatic. Due to detail, we gain a great insight into Reverend Jacobs' emotional state throughout this time, which this is mostly seen when he delivers the terrible sermon, and if you're unfamiliar with what the terrible sermon is, this is when he has lost his faith entirely, and he sermonizes to his congregation about innocent people who have suffered similar fates compared to his family. Then, to top it off, he adds that there is no God, and religion is nothing more than an insurance scam. Now, overall, I think that by King using a reverend to undergo this transformation was a choice that was risky and powerful, which it's risky for the obvious reasons of seeing how a man of God can even be changed due to grief. But at the same time, it's powerful because it reminds us that it's okay to grieve as long as you don't remain stuck in that grief and you receive help, which receiving help is something that Reverend Jacobs never did. Also, the concept of this book reminded me a lot of the book of Job, which, if you're unfamiliar with Job, this book explains why God allows pain and suffering. And when I compared Job to Reverend Jacobs, I could totally see that Reverend Jacobs was a Job-like figure, except in his case, the road ahead never improved. And aside from that, Revival does give some pretty good philosophy in regards to grief and human nature, which this comes about because while Reverend Jacobs is grieving, Jamie's father explains to Jamie that people always want a reason for the bad things in their life. Sometimes there ain't one. Character-wise, as always, King provided us with a great cast of realistic characters, which this is one of the many reasons why I became invested in the story as quick as what I did. Also, when learning about the characters and their conflicts, I honestly believe that there are no actual human villains in this book. Instead, the cast that we're provided is nothing more than a group of flawed individuals who are neither saints or entirely evil. And aside from that, as I had earlier mentioned, the Great God Pan had inspired Stephen King to write Revival, which I had read and reviewed the Great God Pan last year, so if you would like to check out that review, I have provided a link to that review in the description section of this video, so be sure to go check that out. And at the end of the day, Revival scared the ever-loving living hell out of me. And once I discovered that this was in fact a horror novel, it did start to creep me out pretty bad. But most of all, it really just disturbed me with its twist ending and also the child death that was earlier in the book. And I do believe that this is one of those kind of books that's going to stay with me for a long time to come. As I've already stressed, Revival by Stephen King is not a light-hearted read whatsoever, and if the idea of child death and the grief that follows is a triggering subject for you, then this might not be the book for you to read. But with that said, I really became invested with the characters, and I thought the concept was original, as it reminded me of what would happen if Tesla met Lovecraft. Also, more importantly, this book scared the ever-loving living hell out of me, which means that this will be a contender for the top 3 scariest books that I've read this year. And at the end of the day, I do highly recommend Revival, especially if you're looking for a good slow burn with a scary payoff. On to the questions. My first question is, what is a book by Stephen King that scared the ever-loving living hell out of you? My second question is, since Revival deals with the triggering topic of child death, what is a subject that you prefer not to read about? Load up the comments. Personally, when it comes down to reading fiction, I can take a lot. However, if I know that the book deals with graphic scenes of child or animal abuse, I really have to get into the right mindset before I read that book, which that's a reason why I haven't revisited and reviewed The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum quite yet. Now that we have that covered, it's time to close out the video. And before I do, I would like to say thank you to Lisa G, as well as J.L. Mulvihill, which J.L. Mulvihill is a young adult fantasy steampunk author, and her books are available in print, ebook, and audio, and those are available wherever books are sold. Also, I would like to say thank you to Melody Romeo, which Melody Romeo is a historic fiction and fantasy author, and her books are available in print and ebook, which those are available wherever books are sold. And last but not least, I would like to say thank you to my mom. Now, if you're wondering why I'm thanking these wonderful people, it's because they've had the opportunity to contribute to my Patreon account, which if you would like to contribute as well, there's a link available in the description section of this video, and for $5 a month I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos, and if there's a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, I'll do that as well. Also, for $10 a month, you'll still receive that shout out, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I'll send you over a free photo. From there, you can print it off, do whatever you want with it. Now, if you're able to contribute, that's awesome, but if not, no sweat. All I hope is that you return to this channel so we can continue to have a good time together. And if you would like to hunt me down on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all available in the description section of this video. Also, if you have yet to subscribe to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a wonderful week and sweet nightmares.